I remember when I first heard someone say that whiteness isn't a real thing. That is, and it took me a while to understand this because it's like, oh yeah, well, there's white people and there's non-white people. And then I started actually reading the history about whiteness and everything, and how I was just talking in live a little while ago that the concept of whiteness was invented by the Portuguese, which is very funny to me because like on the scale of white people, like they like they barely crack in there, you know, like they barely get there. But there's a really funny letter that Ben Franklin wrote, or an article back in the 1700s, and he's talking about what he envisions the United States to be, like what he wants it to be like. And no surprise, he was an abolitionist, but he thought that it should be a white country, or at least a white majority country. And what's really funny, though, is looking at the letter and reading who Ben Franklin considered to be a white person. That is really funny because he didn't consider Irish people white, obviously. He didn't consider Swedish people white, which, once again, like we would think that would be a shoo-in. Pretty much the only people that he saw as white were British people and people like Northern Germans. And the only reason he included Northern Germans is because he had to, because everyone knows that, the people of Britain descended from the Angles and Saxons from Northern Germany. So he had no choice. Like, he didn't include the rest of the Germans, but only those guys. And so looking back on that and just seeing like who is and who isn't white has been this ever-changing group of people. And so, yeah, it doesn't exist. It's all completely made up. And so trying to claim that there's some sort of white culture that goes back 1,000 years, nonsense.
Yeah, it's completely ahistoric. These people, they claim to like history, but all they do is worship the Roman Empire. They don't know shit about history.
And the Roman Empire was gay as fuck, man. Like
it was.
It was just.
There's only 2 genders. So I'll look at the Roman Empire. They had 3 official genders.
It's this weird carte blanche view of history that you're just gonna pick it. Like, if you would have told Julius Caesar that the Gauls and like Vercingetorix in Western Europe, that they were the same race, he would have laughed you out of the room. He's like, "What are you talking about? Like that's crazy. That's insane." But that's what they try to do. They're like, "Oh yeah, the culture from the Celts in Britain and the Visigoths and the Romans, it's all just white. It's all the same." And that's the really sad thing about this the made up concept of whiteness, is that white people have given up their heritage to become white. You're not a German American, you're white. You're not Irish American, you're white. It's all the same thing, and it's not. Like you lose so much about your actual family and cultural heritage when you just declare yourself. We don't have a choice. Like Black Americans, like we don't have a choice. I have no idea what country or what tribe my folks came from, but white people don't have to do it, and they do it anyway to assume this mantle of whiteness.
Yeah, no, I definitely get what you mean. Like looking at how, like you said, how being white and whiteness has evolved and changed over the years to encompass different nationalities and ethnicities. It really shows how useless race is as a concept.
It is.
Even on the reverse of like even being black. Like my wife is half black and half white, but if you saw her walking down the street, you'd just say that's a black woman.
Yeah.
Not knowing any better, or a light-skinned woman. Because a lot of people just subscribe to the one drop rule.
Yeah.
If you have any bit of black, if your skin is darker than olive skin, then you're considered brown skin. You're considered black. It really has like no real like distinguishing characteristics. The only thing that I've ever seen race be effectively used in is when they use the concept of clines in statistical data. But that's it. As far as like interchanging like interpersonal things day to day and talking to people, race is a very useless concept. It gives us no real utility when it comes to interacting with individuals.
Yeah. But it's great at establishing hierarchies. It's amazing when it comes to that.
Power structures love using race.
And what you just mentioned is the best example of how race doesn't really make any sense, because basically all it exists for is to tell you who is and who is not white. That's really it. That's all. That's that. Because if you're someone who is black and white, well, I don't know what you want to call yourself, but you sure as hell can't call yourself white. You can't do it. It's like that's the rules right there. And so but you can't call yourself black. That's okay, because the important group is the white group. And so and what's I was gonna say about this. Oh, and there's what was the Supreme Court case for segregation?
Was that
Plessy versus Ferguson?
Yeah.
Plessy versus Ferguson.
Yeah.
So what happened with that? It was in the late 1800s, and there was a black. Oh, do you know the story? About the black man.
It's been many years since history class, but you go ahead.
So there was a guy named Homer Plessy, a black man, and I think Louisiana, maybe Alabama, and the city he was in had a rule that said that when the trains came through, there were black train cars and there were white train cars, and black people were on one, black people on the other. And so he knew it was against the law for him to sit in the white train car, but he didn't think it was constitutional to do that. And so he sat in the white train car, and sure enough, when the train came to a stop, the authorities came and said, hey, they arrested him. And he says, yeah, I'm going to challenge this in court because I don't think that, this is actually legal. And it went all the way to it was such a big deal. This went all the way to the Supreme fucking Court. And Supreme Court said, okay, you're right. It's actually not constitutional. So we're going to declare that you can have separate facilities for black people and white people as long as they're equal, which we know that was bullshit. The interesting thing, though, is that Homer Plessy, the black man, was 1/8 black. So, if you saw him, he would be a white guy, but legally he was a black guy because he had one black ancestor that was like his great grandparent. But so the concept of race, it doesn't actually depend on your color or even how you look, depending on the social conditions. It just depends on what society tells you. So yeah, it is bullshit. And that's one of my favorite examples right there.
Yeah, that's honestly a damning example. I think it's funny you said we're going to try and lean away from politics, but the past 20 minutes has been nothing but politics.
I plan to talk about crime and serial killers. And we went straight. We can't help myself, man. I can't. I'm sorry.
I can't either.
I know, right? It's just like you can take the boy out of the city, but you can't take. It's always going to end up going there. But it's just so fascinating, especially with cultural issues like race, and how in the United States, right? So for the Civil War, for slavery. Maybe I don't know there's news to a lot of people out there, but there was a lot of rape going on with chattel slavery in the United States. And this went on so much that you can look at the census population in Virginia and I think the 1840s or something, and the number of mixed race kids, it's in the tens of thousands. Every year it just gets bigger and bigger. And miscegenation, interracial relations was illegal at the time. So it only came from one place. And that was through, the rape of black women. But this went on so often that you would end up with situations with someone like Homer Plessy, because the way the laws were set in the United States is that your status of freedom was based on your mom. If your mom was a slave, that meant you were a slave too. So you could be a slave that was, 3/4 or, 7/8 white. And you would still be, and these white slaves were used as propaganda by abolitionists. And you can find these pictures from the 1850s of a little black boy and a little white girl standing together. And it says, both of these people are slaves. We need to do something to stop this. So they were kind of appealing to white people. It's hey, look, they're making white people slaves too. And that did help grow the abolitionist movement. It's sad that it took something like that, but hey, you take what you can,
Liberals, am I right?
Liberals, right? But it's hard to shit on them too much because I know it worked. I know it worked. It certainly didn't turn more people against slavery, because they had white people slaves too. But it's just, and it also belays how incredibly vile American chattel slavery was. We've done such a good job of papering over this as just some it's just a political disagreement, but these monsters enslaved their own fucking children. They would rape the women they owned and then proceed to enslave their kids for life. Like Thomas Jefferson with Sally Hemings. They had, I think, 6 kids. And I think in his will, he either freed all of them or 4 of them after he died. So for the rest of his life, not his kids were his own slaves. Like it's insanity.
Well, yeah, because in that time, people were raised to literally view black people as livestock.
Yeah.
Like they just viewed it like the same way that you would breed sheep. You know, these are your sheep now. That's how they fucking viewed it, and it's disgusting. And people try and whitewash it and cover over it, like, oh, it was just something that happened. Oh, it's just disagreement for the time. It's just a gentleman's disagreement is what it was, and it's just like, no, it was a literal like apartheid, like ancient apartheid state that was openly segregating and subjugating an entire group of the population because of their skin tone. That's not something you can just gloss on over. And you can't just act like it doesn't affect things today. There's people that own wealth from slave, heirlooms. That people in the South that still fucking benefit from slavery all these hundreds of years later. I mean, even look at statistics on wealth by race. The median wealth for white people, I think, was $111,000. The median wealth for your average African American family was like $30,000.
Yeah. Discrepancy is wild.
Yeah, it's insane to think that we don't still deal with those same issues and people still try and whitewash it and do this weird revisionism while claiming to appreciate history.
Yeah, I know, right? It's only certain types of history you're allowed to talk about, or they want you to talk about. And it is funny, though, that you will bring these statistics up to right wingers and they do their dead level best to try to argue that, listen, I know black people are doing a lot worse in the United States than white people, but it is a total coincidence that, they were enslaved for hundreds of years and then went through 100 years of apartheid. That has no or almost no bearing in this at all. It's like, come on, you know that's not right. You're just saying that. And a lot of things I like to say about the slave owners is that, well, it was a different time and they didn't know any better. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. They absolutely did. Go ahead.
But when people act like segregation was like so long ago, it's just like you realize that Rosa Parks could have owned an iPod.
Oh yeah.
Like she died in, what was it, 2011?
It was incredibly recent. Yeah.
Yeah. Like she literally could have owned an iPod. What do you mean it was that long ago? It was incredibly recent. Like that was literally my grandparents' generation was that generation.
Yeah. Like my parents were born into segregation. Like that's still alive, still very much alive. My parents.
It's fucking insane, man.
Black people weren't allowed in suburbs until 1970. That 1970, like the suburbs, which by the way were like, people like to shit on poor people for, living in subsidized housing. That's what suburbs were. Suburbs, if you ever take like a public policy class on, civil planning, suburbs are a giant net drain on the economy. Like huge. Everything. Like just the infrastructure, the support systems, like emergency services, the paving the roads, they don't provide like any positive. It couldn't possibly exist without government largesse. And in fact, they wouldn't have been built anyway if the federal government didn't guarantee the construction of it to businesses after World War II to give people, a place to live. They wouldn't have happened. But people don't think about it that way. Like they don't think about it the same way they think of, people living in actual public subsidized housing. And with the slave owners, when they say they didn't know any better, it's funny to read. Like Thomas Jefferson's my favorite one because Thomas Jefferson was very smart and he wrote a lot and he wrote how he really felt about a lot of things. And so people try to say that, the founding fathers were these, staunch Christians. No, that Jefferson made it very clear that he didn't believe in a lot of that nonsense. But he talked a lot about his thoughts about slavery and about black people. And he wrote that he didn't think slavery was moral. He's like, yeah, this is wrong and we should probably get rid of it. But did it his entire life because it made him filthy fucking rich. So here, what that tells you about Thomas Jefferson is that he knew it was wrong and he did it anyway because it made him like one of the wealthiest people in the continent, possibly on the globe. And when it came to, I do say this about the founding fathers, is that if they fast forwarded in time, like I think Thomas Jefferson, because he says, in my heart, I believe that black people are of equal intelligence to white people. Like I think that in my heart, but when I go outside and talk to them, it just doesn't seem that way. It's like, oh, really? How surprising that the people that you don't allow to go to school
legally deny people an education. You wonder why they can't, why they're illiterate. Like, come on.
It's funny how that works, Tommy. Yeah. So I think he would say, okay, all right, I can see that, black people have equal rights. I got that. But it would shatter his brain to see that women have equal rights. Like that thought never crossed his mind. It's funny reading back on the founding fathers and that how, it wasn't just the racism, but the sexism was pretty bad too. Someone wrote or suggested, like back then the voting age was 21. And someone suggested they lower it to either 18 or 16. I don't remember who made that suggestion. And John Adams read this. And John Adams said, let 18-year-olds vote. Are you fucking crazy? And he said, like, what? We're going to let black people vote next? We're going to let 12-year-olds vote? We're going to let women vote? Like, it was that crazy. Like,
yeah.
It was that insane. So, yeah, I don't think I think that the sexism was, just as bad as the racism and actually worse because they wouldn't have thought about that at all. It didn't cross their, like women got the right to vote after black men did. Like it's crazy that happened.
Although they still, through back-ended ways still prevented black men from voting.
Yep.
Yep, you got to be landowning.
Yeah, it is because I remember learning as a kid that, about the civil rights movement and everything in the 1960s. So I was surprised, like in middle school, when I found out that black people got the right to vote in 1865. I said, really? And then I read, okay, I see. All right, I see what happened here. Okay, I kind of see what's going on there. But
it's just like redlining. It may not explicitly say black people can't live here, but you're still allowing the banks in the real estate development to exclude people based on their last name.
It's
based on the area that they come from. But we're trying to prevent these neighborhoods from getting a little too risque, if you will.
Yeah. And
America's always done it.
What's really frustrating about that is you bring this up to right wingers and you'll say, okay, because they like to say the same thing. So listen, there's no law anywhere saying that black people can't live in this area or you have to pay white people. There's no law saying that. So systemic racism doesn't exist. And then they'll turn around and say, Twitter is discriminating against conservatives. Like, okay, show me, show me where it's written in. So they do understand the concept of, structuralized, oppression, but what I say about conservatives all the time is that if you talk to conservatives about racism, they'll say, listen, racism doesn't exist. But to the extent that it does, it's against white people. Like that. Yeah. That's what they say. That's what they stand on it every time. It's crazy to listen to.
Yeah, man, that is a crazy mindset to have.
Yeah.